I want to show you a couple fun things that have made my life easier with my quilting career. I want to show you some fun background fills, some feathers, some little arcs, and then the best thing ever is binding a quilt while it's still on the long arm. It's the best thing ever. You know, I know there are people who love to bind and there are people who hate to bind. I definitely fall into the I hate to bind, but this has made it, you know, so much easier. So come back a couple times because we're gonna have several different uploads. It's a little series, quilting and then binding. You won't want to miss it. So the first little design I'm going to quilt are these are pebbles. I'm going to put pebbles in here and here. I guess they're really pearls. But once you know how to quilt pearls, you're really fancy, I think. If you go slow, you can make them nice and circly. And I like to do them freehand because you can make them be big enough to fill whatever spot you need filled. It's also really pretty to make them big and little. That makes them pretty too. And pearls are just a really good outliner of a quilt, of a piecing design. Don't they make that diamond pop up? So I love swirls. I think swirls look so pretty quilted in just about anything. But other designs look really good with swirls too. So you don't have to just limit yourself to one thing. If you only do one thing, it's boring. I like putting these little leaf things in. And you can even make them more fancy by, instead of making them round at the top, making them pointy. And then back to a swirl. If you get bored of one thing, you just do something else. Now, you can just move up to another location to add more quilting. You just fill up with whatever shape you have with a nice fill, and it'll look really good. So my thread is not perfectly matching. I'm using glide thread in sterling, I think. So it gives it a nice pretty shimmer. So that's my favorite fill right now. I think it looks pretty. Okay, so now I want to show you how I like to quilt. Well, Lone Star quilts definitely, but any quilt block that I want to feature and kind of show off more the piecing more so than my quilting. And so what I do is I put these arcs inside the block, and it makes it look very pretty. It's very traditional, but it can be very modern as well. And the trick is just finding a pathway through the quilt block to make it quick and efficient and easy. Okay, come and look. So I'm going to put in little arcs in these diamonds, and I always love how it turns out. It's just a matter of making the pathway this better than Stitch in the Ditch because it gives it almost a puffy and tufted look. I'm using a wool batting, and that also really helps make it look fluffy. And now I'll just go back and echo those arcs. And I'll do the same thing for this entire section. I think it looks really fancy, but it's really easy. And I think it can also hide a bunch of piecing problems. So I've got a tutorial for this Lone Star, this strip pieced Lone Star. It's further along in my feed if you're interested in making one for yourself. All right, so now I'm gonna show you some feathers. I love feathers in big areas because they eat up a ton of space, and you can make them really fancy or really simple depending on what you and the quilt desire. I think they're pretty quick too, and I think you'll love them. Let me show you how I do them. I mix a whole bunch of different stuff in, so they're kind of exciting. All right. So I like a double, I like a fat spine to grow my feathers off of. I think it looks pretty. This is a traditional bump over feather, right? Bump, bump, over. This one is a cat claw feather. So those look like they're already echoed. And then that's a leaf. There's some spines. And maybe now just a swirl. And now back to feathers. And I want to show you how to bind on the long arm. I know a lot of people hate binding and a lot of people love binding. Well, this technique is great for either of you because you can finish with hand binding on the back, or you can just do it with your domestic sewing machine. I absolutely love this technique. I do it on most of my quilts now. Some tips to remember, the quilt needs to be pretty square anyway, because if it's a really wonky, wobbly quilt, it's going to be hard to bind, and you're probably not going to get good results. But for just run-of-the-mill quilts, this works great. So let me show you how I do it. I use regular folded binding. It doesn't have to be bias binding. It could be regular square binding. And I like my binding to be 2 3/4 of an inch, or like 2.5 inches. It's your choice. I like the fatter binding. All right, let me show you how to do it. All right, so I have this at a 45-degree angle. So as we finish the binding, we're gonna fold it in here, okay? So if you're wondering why it looks like that, that's why. So my foot is the needle is 1/4 of an inch away from the sides. So I'm gonna use that as my guide. And you do it the exact same way that you would do it on your domestic machine, except you're doing it with your long arm. And I have a ruler base So if you're more comfortable using a ruler, you absolutely can. I'll show you how that looks. You might have better control. You know, just slow going. And it's a lot of back and forth. As you roll the quilt, it's just so much faster on this long arm. Grab your ruler. Okay, so now I can't go any further because I've run into the bar. So I leave my needle down in my quilt. I'm going to advance the quilt and keep on going. I'll show you one more corner and then I'll just show you how I finish it, okay? That's a 45-degree angle fold, and then you fold back on it. So you make your little mitered corner. As I come up to this corner, I'm going to show you kind of slower what I do. So I'm going to stop about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the quilt. And then I'm going to sew off the quilt. So I went doo-doo-doo-doo, and then I turned and I sewed right off. And that's important so you can get your miter when you go to fold the binding over to the other side. All right, so now we've made our turn. We're gonna go up as far as we can before we have to roll the quilt out of the way. I'm gonna stop there, leave my needle in the quilt, and I'm gonna roll it so I can get back up to the top. 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Sew off. 45-degree fold. Fold it back. We're almost done. Here's where we started. So we just need to cut a little extra binding to tuck inside. Voila. So now what I'll do is I'll take the quilt off, I'll trim all the extra batting and all the backing away, and then I just turn this binding around to the back and I just machine sew it downstairs on my Bernina, and it goes this fast, and it's a fraction of the pain of binding. Or if you're fancy and you like to do the hand stitching, you can absolutely still do that with this technique. Anyway, please let me know if you have any questions. I hope this binding technique works for you. I love it. Another great way to use your Gammill long arm.